Hello my friends, welcome back to the walkthrough crew. Cycle 210, this is video number 8, and like usual we'll start off with the same checks of health on our base, one of which is how many dupes we have. I'm still at 11, haven't felt a need to really take on any more recently as all my stuff is getting done to a pretty good speed and pretty good efficiency. For what it's worth, I'll really only go up to about 15 dupes on a given run. You can go higher than that, you can stay lower than that, it doesn't matter too much. Just make sure you can still always feed and provide oxygen for your dupes. Yeah, so the values that we're always interested in, my coal has skyrocketed, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. My algae is holding steady. I am mining a little bit of it out, but like we talked about, we do need to get on a renewable resource for oxygen here in the future, so that's something to think about. And finally, something that I haven't been checking the last couple of videos, even though I should be, is my water levels. They're doing okay. I still haven't ran this full cycle yet because this seed that I was on spawned with a ton of water. This is one of, well, lots of tons of water. How about that? Yeah, so this whole cycle hasn't quite run yet. I'm still only on my starting water. This is still what's remaining. But I still have plenty of opportunity to start bringing water in from the rest of my network. And I'm going to start talking a little bit about that here in this video. But I'll talk about that a little bit later. We're going to talk about projects that we said we were going to do from the last video, and one of which is moving our ventilation all the way down to the bottom of the base. So here it is sitting here, and I have another setup here to start ventilating oxygen into these atmosuits for the oil area. So yeah, nothing too crazy going on here quite yet. When you've entered the oil area, you want to make sure you do use these suits because it's very hot in here. Your dupes will start taking damage almost immediately upon entering this area. So yeah, make sure to do that. And the reason you want to get in here is obviously because of this oil. And I have dug some of this out and kind of made flow to get the oil down to the bottom here so I can just pump it in one place. I don't need to keep rebuilding pumps everywhere, which will kind of be a recurring theme in this video as well. But let's hook everything up and I'll show you the whole setup. So we're just going to turn on the power here. As soon as we do that, we have a flow of oil coming up the pipe. I use insulated pipe here just to be sure that I'm leaving as little room, or sorry, as little oil in these pipes as possible so that it doesn't heat up the rest of my base constantly. It's flowing through this liquid shutoff, and this liquid shutoff is actually hooked up to a liquid reservoir here that basically tells it when it wants oil and when to stop sending oil, so that I don't keep oil in these pipes as it's coming up. This is a little bit advanced. You do have to run the automation wire all the way down there, but we do the same thing for pipes and for power lines and whatever, so this isn't that weird. Yeah, so that's just kind of a small little nitpicky thing that I'm doing here, but we're going to have a little bit of a piping lesson here today. But the whole idea behind this setup is that crude oil, or this regular oil that we pump from down at the bottom, is going to go into this tank. It's going to go into this metal refinery, which is going to allow us to start producing steel, which we've talked about, which I don't have refined carbon for, so we might as well get that started now that it's on our mind. How about 40 refined carbons, and all of you do it. So now that we have oil finally flowing into here, you'll see that some of it's going to go into the metal refinery, and I'm going to pause, by the way. Some of it's going into the metal refinery, and then it's going to come out of the metal refinery and go into this oil, or sorry, yeah, into this oil refinery. And it's immediately going to be turned into petroleum, which the petroleum is going to either go into this polymer press to create plastic, or it's just going to sit down in these tanks so that it can eventually be used for power. There's a lot to unpack here, so I'll start at the very beginning. I have a setup here that makes my pipes prioritize filling the metal refinery, and it prioritizes emptying the metal refinery whenever whenever flow happens. So the way you can do this is, and this is going to be a really mini piping lesson, but if you have a requester on a line before another requester, this is going to make sure that the first requester is totally filled up before it's allowed to pass through. So we'll wait for this to fill up just a little bit. I probably could have paused it a little bit later so I don't have to awkwardly buy time. But once this is filled up, it's going to be like, okay, you're full. So I'm just going to start skipping this, and I'm going to go to the next one. Now, the second part of this is that if you're on a line with a emptying point, and there's a second emptying point on there, The second emptying point won't be allowed to empty until there is no flow on this line. So that means that this metal refiner will be prioritized both to be filled up and to be emptied, so that the regular flow of oil is not something that's disrupting this whole process. I could also smooth this out by adding another tank here if I really wanted to, just to catch the hot oil that comes out of the metal refinery and then prioritize it to be sent into the oil refinery. I may actually do that upon a second glance here, but at least for right now, this allows me a liquid to run through my metal refinery that I know is not going to overheat, it's not going to like vaporize or anything like that, which is definitely a problem if you're using like water, and potentially polluted water. So this is why I waited for oil. But you could run this with polluted water or extremely cold regular water. Whatever comes out of this after something gets refined is going to be very hot. So let's start an errand here and let's force somebody to do it just so you can see the temperature difference. So right now we have oil in here at about 193 degrees Fahrenheit. And hopefully someone will get down here and get this started here pretty quickly so you can see how hot this dumps out. But like I said, down the line, this is going to be expecting to eventually feed into this polymer press, which I have on automation. So I'm going to start this up. And this polymer press is used for a couple of different reasons. One of which was something that I alluded to a little earlier. By the way, here's this process going. So now we're going to just basically watch this pipe and to see what temperature it was. We know it was sitting at 193 earlier. So I'm just going to watch this pipe and see what the temperature is coming out. And coming out, this is at 336. So this added a ton of heat onto this liquid. And this is why I like to use oil for this, because then it can immediately be turned into something else, and it can immediately be spent if this polymer press is on, or if I'm using these for power. So yeah, that's the whole reasoning why I have this whole setup hooked up to oil. I've always found this to be the easiest way to do it. You can obviously use whatever setup you want, but you want to get to this point eventually, because steel and plastic are going to be the things that you really need to eventually start finishing the game. And not only to build the monument at the end of the game, but also to get out into space and start launching rockets and stuff like that. Which we'll talk about in upcoming videos, but just know that you need to have this stuff running to get out into space. And a lot of what we're doing right now is going to be about getting out into space. So, now that we've got our oil flowing, I feel like we've officially entered the mid-game segment. And a lot of the mid-game, to me, is about adding as much power as you can before you start getting out into space. And it's not necessarily that you need the power, it's just that this may be the point where you have a harder time relying exclusively on natural gas once you get these heavy hitters in terms of power requesters, or relying on coal. So I added these petroleum generators, and if you just look at the wattage that these generate, the coal produces about 600, which is okay, I guess. Natural gas produces about 800, which is really good for a resource that's effectively free if I'm just hooked up to one of the geysers. And then these things produce 2,000, so these are very, very strong. But I don't want these to run all the time, and again, I do have these on a separate automation grid. So I have these really only running in the need of emergency. And the reason I don't want to have to run these all the time is because these produce a ton of carbon dioxide, and it's expensive to deal with all that. I'll have to like blow it out of here with this gas pump. So yeah, that's right now we have 3 basic power sources, but this mid-game section is usually going to be about diversifying those power sources as much as you possibly can, especially because you're not always going to be playing on maps with a lot of natural gas. So, throughout this section of the game, I'm going to be doing a lot of work to try to find other power sources, and you might think like, well, what other power sources really are there? So if you have these natural gas geysers, sure, that's going to help you, but that's not always going to be 100% reliable. This seed in particular is pretty busted because of how much natural gas I actually have. So I'll capture these other 2. But one thing I want you to be thinking about now that you're in this oil biome is that you might notice underneath the oil there's this liquid hot magma. And this magma, or anything that's at this temperature, you can consider this as energy. I would think of this as energy only because this is exactly how geothermal power works. If you have something that's hot enough, you can turn that into steam by putting water on it, and then that steam can go through a turbine to eventually spin the blades and give you power. So there is research for this, which is something we're going to get really soon, and this steam power is something that's going to generate a ton of energy for us in a lot of different ways. So this is going to be a constant theme, and I'm going to research this. And this is not only for the magma, and you don't have to come down here for the magma. You can leave this alone. I would not recommend doing this on your first time. This can be very unforgiving if you have a build that doesn't exactly do what you want it to right away, and this is a good way to spend a lot of resources trying to deal with it. There's other easier ways to interact with this. So for this playthrough, and just for the sake of showing as much as I possibly can, we're going to use steam turbines on things like this volcano, because if the volcano puts out just small amounts of magma, that's a lot easier for us to handle than like a whole biome full of it. I'm also going to be capturing this hydrogen vent, because this is one of the best vents in the whole game. I'll show you a good hydrogen vent setup. There's also some other volcanoes around the map that we can handle, or rather capture, like this gold volcano. This will also give us a little bit of resources that are pretty useful. It's basically just free refined gold once we get it out of there. And also this leaky oil fissure, which I said earlier that I don't usually unpack because I don't typically need the energy from it, but just for the sake of the walkthrough, I'm going to put together a build that you can mimic, and this will maybe be our source of oil for later in the game as well. So might be pretty cool, so we'll try it out. Yeah, there could be other sources around the map. There could be like steam vents, there could be all kinds of other stuff, and by that I mean the hot steam vents. These cool steam vents that I have down here, these are not going to put out steam that's going to be hot enough for our steam turbines. They need to be at least like 250 degrees Fahrenheit. So yeah, if you see a steam vent, it needs to be a non-cool steam vent. That one's basically one of the easiest setups to get in terms of getting free power with your steam turbines. So I'm kind of rambling a little bit, and yeah, I understand that. So let's move on to one other thing before we talk about a couple of random notes, and then we move on to what we're going to be talking about in the next video. This is a long one, wow. But this is an important transition in the game, by the way. So this is one of the hardest things that I had to overcome when I was learning the game. So I figure it's good to spend a good amount of time on it. So let's talk about the water pools that are down here, which you may have noticed already. I have now emptied all of the water that was in my way when I was digging downward and kind of just put it in a pool down here. And I'm going to want to actually introduce this into my water network before I start tapping any of the natural water on the map. So like there's this saltwater geyser, for example, but the salt water comes out at like 203 degrees Fahrenheit, which is almost boiling. So I don't want to have to deal with all of the heat that's going to generate when I can just pump up water that's only like 110 degrees. Or if I need to refill this after I use up all this water, for example, I can start opening these pools and allowing these pools to just flow into this one. And if you look up just this ladder line, you can see how many pools I could possibly get. So I could get this and this, that. I could probably run this one over. A bunch of salt water here I could eventually have flow down. So there's a lot of water around the map that I would recommend using before starting to tap any of these more natural sources. And ultimately, you shouldn't need a whole ton of water to maintain your food or your oxygen production, which we're going to get to here in just a little bit. So most runs, unless you're really spending a long time on there, or unless you're purposefully wanting to be self-sustaining, you could probably just use all of the random water around the map and rely on that the entire game without needing to tap any of the geysers and stuff. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to introduce any builds or anything to capture these because they can be kind of not really worth their weight for how much energy you have to put into tapping them. I may make other videos later to talk about how to capture stuff like this, but I don't think it's going to be in this walkthrough. Another couple random notes is I'm going to eventually need eggshells like I talked about for my steel, and if I don't want to continue to add hatches because they're kind of expensive to run food here all the time, and if I don't really need the coal, I'm going to have to think about ranching something else. And usually the next thing that people will start ranching, myself included, are these Drecos, which there was one here a second ago. Here we go. They're these guys. This is because, especially on these earlier maps, if you have any way to capture or generate chlorine, these things will eat balm lilies, and balm lilies basically grow for free if they're set in chlorine. So that's going to probably be one of the next things that I ranch, but the problem is that I don't have a chlorine gas geyser that I've found. So I'm just capturing chlorine that I suck up from my, my ventilation system right here that I can eventually empty into another room. You could use like these gas reservoirs if you really want to, but I didn't want to take up a bunch of space with those, so I just put this up instead. And then as I crack these chlorine sections in these biomes, that means that I can just store it. It'll eventually get sucked up by my ventilation system and stored. so that I can use it in that Dreco chamber. So that's my plan for that. And those Drecos are really just going to be for eggshells and maybe for meat. And eventually, and I hate to do this because I feel kind of bad about it, but I may eventually get entirely off these blossoms if we're producing enough meat for barbecue and stuff like that. So, spoiler alert, that's coming soon. Alright, this video is getting real long, so I want to really quickly capture the stuff I'm going to be talking about next time. I'm going to be talking about this pool of water here, which as you can see has kind of risen in temperature. It's not really doing very well. That's because there's not a ton of liquid ice, or sorry, polluted ice on this map. Liquid ice, lol, that's called water. Polluted ice on this map, and kind of digging further and further into this biome is just going to waste more and more of my dupe's time. So the next video is going to be me setting up an Aqua Tuner and starting to cool this with a source that's going to generate, or rather require, a lot of power and generate a lot of heat. But the Aqua Tuners are really key to like this mid-game phase of cooling water, or just providing generic like base cooling or cooling for any of the volcanoes or whatever you want to do by this stage of the game. So before I capture any of those other power sources, I really need to come up with a cooling solution that's going to be able to push all that. So that's going to be next, and also our solution to start generating oxygen from water instead of algae is going to be next, so I don't have to keep paying for the digs and the expense of running algae back and forth. So that will all be coming up soon, and I will be showing videos about all that. Sorry for the longish video, but this is really the stage of the game that I see most people not understanding how to transition, so hopefully this sheds some light on it. Please let me know if this video was helpful or not helpful, or if you have anything else to say down in the comments, please do so. I will greatly appreciate that. Oh, by the way, one more thing I forgot to mention. I am now hooked up to a desalinator so that I can basically clean any type of water that comes in here. You will want to get something like this set up, along with some filters to send the right things to the right places. But yeah, I'll be back really soon with another video. Hopefully it won't be too big of a gap, and I think it will just be with the Aqua Tuner for this and the oxygen setup, and probably be somewhere like right here. So yeah, I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for watching.